Greetings. It is time for my monthly inflation update, which I did not do last month. But this month, we have more data that has proven a lot of my predictions and my third millennium economics thesis to be correct. So as always, we go to my familiar matrix where I take three rather unrelated measures, the U.S. CPI, 10-year compound annual growth rate, to smooth out any short-term volatility, the Goldman Sachs Commodity Index, 10-year compound annual growth rate. This is the most important of the three because it is worldwide and comprised of freely traded commodities. Therefore, it is unriggable. And while it is fashionable to say that the U.S. CPI is deliberately rigged to understate inflation, not only is that not true, but the Goldman Sachs Commodity Index is the more comprehensive measurement anyway. And then the 10-year U.S. Treasury yield, which is less an indication of past inflation and more an indication of future expectations of inflation. And we'll see what they are today on September 22nd, 2024. First, we'll go to the 10-year U.S. Treasury yield. 10-year U.S. Treasury yield, 3.728%. It rose a lot after the dip in COVID, but it is well below the high it had reached of almost 5% about a year ago. So 3.728%, above 3%, but well off its high. If you take the long-term maximum reading of this, you can see that we are very low relative to historical standards. In fact, where we are now is what it had declined to in 2003, 2004. Now we go to the Goldman Sachs Commodity Index. Goldman Sachs Commodity Index, and the URL for this is in the description box below as always. 10-year rate is minus 0.89%. Deflation. It has been falling by almost 1% a year, minus 0.89% compounded over a 10-year window. And the reason that this is the most comprehensive and credible metric of all is because it comprises of freely traded commodities, which are priced worldwide. So every narrative about inflation statistics being rigged or manipulated or not comprehensive enough is invalidated by the Goldman Sachs Commodity Index. And commodity price inflation, of course, is where the more simplified understanding of inflation actually is valid, because with commodities, you can state as a straight line that when prices are lower, that is better for people. When prices are higher, that is worse for people, because human labor is a very small portion of commodity prices. Whereas with service price inflation, it is a lot more ambiguous. The person buying a service may experience inflation if the price of the service they're buying has risen, but the service provider's salary has risen simultaneously in the process. So whether it's good or bad at the macroeconomic level is far more ambiguous in service prices, because wage increases are simultaneous with service price inflation increases. But the Goldman Sachs Commodity Index is in deflation, which strongly proves my third millennium economics thesis, formerly Atom thesis, because this is what you would expect to occur in a high-tech age. So now we go to the third measurement, the U.S. CPI. This is the bls.gov website, which is in the description box below, and we can see the U.S. CPI. And now we can see all of the measurements that we are accustomed to. This is the CPI actual reading. And to take the 10-year compound annual growth rate of this, which is what my matrix mandates, you have to take the actual reading, which most recently was 314, and then the reading exactly 10 years prior, which is 237. And this is how much inflation there was in 10 years. Take the 10th root of this to see how much it was per year on a compounded basis. Now, as we scroll down, we can see the 1-month percentage change. That big inflation spike in late 2021, early 2022 is now well and truly in the past, and things are drifting back down to a low level. 2-month percentage change, 3-month percentage change, getting very close to zero here. 6-month percentage change also falling, and 1-year percentage change. When the 1-year percentage change was high, people used to come by saying that only the 1-year percentage change matters. Now that it's low, they say, well, that doesn't matter. We have to find something else that tells us inflation is high, and we're running out of things to cite and anecdotes to convey. And the 1-year growth rate of inflation is only 2.6% at this point. So I have organized this into a simpler table, which will be more illuminating. If we take the August 2024 reading that we have just seen, and to get the annualized amount, we take the factorials or roots of it to calculate that compounding number. So the 1 month reading has to be taken to the 12th power, 2 months to the 6th power, 3 months to the 4th power, 6 month square. 1 year, as we saw, is 2.6%. And then for the 2-year inflation reading, to annualize that, we take the square root of it. 3 years, cube root, 5 years, fifth root, and the one that we really want, 10 years, the 10th root. We have had 32.5% inflation in the CPI over the last 10 years. That is 2.9% a year. And just for fun, I have included the number since the beginning of the 21st century, where we have had 79.4% inflation, but that comes to only 2.5% a year. And these short-term numbers are low, as we can see, meaning that recent inflation has just not been high. Even the 2-year reading is just 3%. That spike of inflation that we saw, where annualized inflation briefly went over 9% but fell just as fast as it rose, is now only visible in this 3-year to 5-year window. So the fact that people are still whining about this is pretty invalid, I would say, because they're saying that 2.5 years ago they were inconvenienced and they wish to get sympathy out of that or be a victim on account of that. But no, the CPI inflation is not high, and the US CPI is not rigged either. I don't care what anyone says. No one has shown me any comprehensive case with evidence about how the US CPI is rigged. It just reports numbers that are inconvenient to their emotions, which is why they say the US CPI is rigged. And if you think it is rigged, go back to the Goldman Sachs Commodity Index. So now we go back to my matrix with all the readings we have seen. So we saw the 10-year compound annual growth rate of the US CPI, the 10-year compound annual growth rate of the Goldman Sachs Commodity Index, the most important of the three, and the 10-year US Treasury yield. And so what are the results? Well, as we can see, the US CPI is at 2.9%. It's approaching 3%. Remember, 3% is where inflation is optimal. That's not some red line danger zone, because inflation too far below this number means technological progress is sluggish. Inflation is fuel for technological progress, as I described elsewhere on this channel. The Goldman Sachs Commodity Index is in deflation, minus 0.89%. This is the most important by far. And only one of these three measurements, the 10-year U.S. Treasury yield, is above 3%, is at 3.73%, as we saw. So far, only one of these three is above 3%. I need all three of these to be above 3% before I say inflation is higher than optimal. 3% is optimal for the maximum amount of technological progress, for the minimum amount of suffering for the poorest people. Not a lot of people understand that, but I've explained that on this channel in many other places. So no, inflation is not high, and I don't care what anyone says, because the people who claim that inflation is high, they debate via anecdote and use a whole bunch of other easily debunked emotion-driven memes, and I describe all of those in this tag up here in the upper right-hand corner, where I describe this as Kartik's law of inflation. So anyone who wants to understand the complicated topic of inflation more thoroughly should view that video as well. So this was my inflation update, and for the next several videos on this channel, I am going to pull up some videos I made as far back as 3 years ago, and not only remaster them with AI audio, but cite how my prediction was right. So when people ranging from Nouriel Roubini to Peter Schiff to Economics Explained, the YouTube channel, said that we are on the brink of hyperinflation, only to find that since that time, inflation has utterly collapsed, I will do a victory lap about how they were wrong because their understanding of economics is many decades out of date. So that will be the next couple of videos on this channel. Now, if you like this type of content, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel, and thank you very much for watching.